Welcome to the Savvy Dentist Podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hi everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist Podcast. It's terrific to have your company for another episode of the show. Now, as a practice owner, there's a lot to do. Sometimes it can get really overwhelming. You might be thinking about your marketing strategy. You might be thinking about your team dynamics and the structures or any issues going on between people there. You're thinking about your finances, your tax, payroll tax coming up, not to mention how you're going to grow this practice of yours and achieve the things that are important to you. Sometimes the list becomes so long, it gets really, really overwhelming. And I think it's really important as a practice owner, how do you reconcile that sense of overwhelm? How do you overcome it so that you can continue to move forward and achieve the goals that are really important to you? And all of us in practice ownership, or indeed any business ownership, need to be able to understand that there is a process to reconcile that busyness. The world is certainly speeding up. The rate of change, the pace of change is increasing with all the technological advances we know about. And so I don't think this problem of overwhelm is going to go away anytime soon. So we need a way of addressing it. And my guest today is Daniel Sih, and Daniel is a productivity expert. And what's really interesting around this is his frameworks for helping you keep pace with what you want to keep pace with, but also making space for things that are important in your life, I think is a really important framework for every practice owner to understand and apply if you're going to maintain a sense of sanity as you grow your practice. So in this conversation, we do cover a lot of territory. We talk about the habits and the behaviors that underpin productivity, but we also talk about the habits and the behaviors that underpin creating space for yourself. And I think this is a really, really important podcast for every single business owner. So Daniel Sih is our guest today, and you can find him at spacemakers.au. And I'd encourage you to head across to his website because there is a treasure trove of goodies there. There's a lot of things that, in terms of blog articles and podcasts and things that I'd encourage you to explore as you think about getting that sense of productivity balanced with a sense of space in your own life. So without any further ado, here's Daniel Sih. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. Hey Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us on the Savvy Dentist Podcast. How's things all the way down in Hobart?
Oh, look, it's cold, but it's cold everywhere right now. But thank you so much for having me on the show.
Daniel, I'm really interested in the work that you do. You're a productivity consultant. You help people achieve more, do more, have more meaning, impact, purpose, etc. in their life, as much as achieve the professional success they're seeking. But I was interested to hear that you started your professional life as a physiotherapist, and I've always thought that everyone's journey from where they started to where they end up is rarely a straight line. And I'm curious to ask about the journey that took you from physio into the work you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's definitely not. I like how Dan Pink says that rather than A to B to C, most of us go from A to C to chocolate cake to banana truffle and then to D, and that's how careers kind of tend to go along from a research perspective. So yeah, as you mentioned, my first career was as a physiotherapist. I worked there for about 10 years as a clinician, doing outpatients, doing rehab. I eventually became a manager in the public service, managing a bunch of physio services. But part of the journey really was that I found the transition from being a clinician to a manager both challenging but also really exhilarating. And I really enjoyed it. But I turned around at one point and I realized I was spending, a third of my time reading and responding to this weird thing called email, and then going from meeting to meeting and managing staff and dealing with finances and compliance. And none of it was what I was trained to do. I was trained in anatomy and physiology and, how to do subjective and objective examinations. And I just realized how mad it was that the skills needed to lead a business or to lead an organization are really very different when you're a clinician. And I also realized that there's really a lot of poor management in health because of that reason. And I just became fascinated by it, fascinated with the idea of how do we work and how can we work in such a way that we achieve our outcomes. Productivity for me being not about doing more or about being more efficient. In fact, I think true productivity nowadays is about doing less, which we could talk about later. But it's about making space to know who you want to be and live that intentional life. And so I just became fascinated. So that was the first step. I can explain the transition in a second, but that's where it began.
Look, I think there's obviously a deep curiosity there around work, how work happens, how to be, I suppose, dare I say, good at work. And when I say good at work, I mean producing work that you're happy and proud of versus just, burning through the to-do list or the pile of papers or whatever it is. What happened once you got curious? You obviously started reading, learning, developing your own ideas, thinking about how you wanted to live your life with intent. Did you have that realization all at once that perhaps physio wasn't going to be your forever career? Or did you suddenly just wake up one day and go, I'm done, I'm cooked, I'm out? What was the tipping point?
I was probably a bit of both. So on the one hand, I started to get really curious, obviously with a science background, when I started to realize, okay, well, I've got an inbox with flagged and unflagged emails. I'm getting hundreds a day. I'm feeling stressed about email and digital overload. Well, then I wonder what the research says. So I actually got geeky and I started to look up email research, and there is actually a lot around. And I started to put into practice what I saw and adapted and talked with others. And I ran a business book club and I eventually basically built in some really strong productivity practices that made a tremendous difference. And part of that, I realized that I knew how to get my inbox to zero. And so I realized that there were so many people around me in my allied health profession that needed the help, but it was a bit unusual to say, hey, do you want me to help you with your inbox when I'm a physio? It just wasn't really in scope of practice. So my mate and I, and he was also in health, we went to a training consortium in government and said, look, we're two schmucks. We don't have any qualifications in training, but we've got this great idea to help people with their inbox and get them to zero. Are you interested? And they said, yes, if you can get 8 people register. So we created a course called Email Ninja, literally as a side hustle. I mean, we created an ABN, but it was really just so we could train a few people and do it for fun. And it just exploded very, very quickly. So I ended up with this kind of side business, which I ran between 5 and 7 o'clock at night after I did my real job in the day. So that was probably part one of the problem. Part two of the problem is I nearly burnt out in that time. I had young kids. I was building a house. I was volunteering lots in my church, plus I had these 2 businessy weird things. And I started getting breathless.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, it's not good at all. I was breathless when I stood in front of my team. And then I became breathless, at the dinner table. Eventually I was breathless just reading the Gruffalo to my kids at night. And I had lung function tests, I had exercise tests, and thankfully nothing came up as being wrong from that perspective. And the doctor heard about my lifestyle and basically said, look, I think this is what you'd call anxiety. And it was, I acknowledged that. So it was a bit of a wake up, particularly because I had a friend who had a similar trajectory to me and he had actually burnt out, crashed, went to hospital and has never worked as a senior leader again. And so I was like, I can see myself heading that way. And so I started to really ask questions about what does it mean to work? What does it mean to live well? What type of life do I want to live past my 30s? And how do I make space in my life for what truly matters, which is where the Space Maker idea came from. And it's the business I run now.
Interesting, the whole doctor heal thyself kind of methodology. It's really similar to my business. I started my business because I was unhappy with the way my business was, my dental practice was going, and I needed to make changes. And my first business, I sold it. But when we came back and started again with a different business, it was a very different perspective, very different outlook. And I've got a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and he says, we all go into psychology because we want to fix ourselves. And sometimes I feel like some businesses are born out of our own personal frustrations and our own challenges we're trying to solve, and you realize, hey, I'm not the only one that has these challenges. I'm not the only person who's thinking about these things. So I wanted to ask you a bit about those early days of, figuring out, the productivity piece, because I think it is something that really is endemic in today's world. It feels like the world is moving ever faster. It feels like we have less time for quality relationships. It feels we have less time for health. It feels like we have less time for the things that we all say are important, we know are important, but we don't actually prioritize. And I don't think that there'd be too many people who haven't kind of ticked one of those boxes. I'd like to have more time for this, or this. And I know it's more than just time, and it's about living intentionally. So tell me about making space, because I think that's a really interesting thought. And I'm curious to explore that and to unpick that a bit more so I can understand what's in that space?
Yeah, so look, I called myself Space Makers, our company Space Makers, because when I think about productivity or time management or living well, I actually think the thing we need most is space, particularly in a post-COVID world. I mean, I started this 10 years ago, and if anything, the people I coach, the people I train and work with are busier than they've ever been, like you've said. People don't tell me they need more information. They don't tell me they're lacking opportunity. They tell me that they need space. And if only they could think and single task and slow down and walk slower and have space simply to reflect on what they're doing, then actually the quality of their life would go up, and the quality of their relationships, the quality of their work. And I think that's really true. So I think making space is now synonymous with productivity, and yet there's a complex interplay between technology, habits, and space. And so I help people navigate that. I help them work out, what does it look like to actually build in great habits? And what does it look like to build habits where you're not working, you're not online, where you put the things in that really matter in order to make space? And like you said, I like that. Dr. Heal Thyself, there's a quote from someone once said, "I teach what I most need to learn." And, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started lots of things. I love doing stuff. I think I know so much about making space because I've always found it hard to have the right mix and the right balance, given all the things I love doing. And therefore, I have something to teach, but I do live out what I teach as well.
Yeah, happy days. So can we talk a little bit about some of these things you've mentioned already? You've spoken a bit about habits. You've spoken a bit about technology, the interplay between habits and technology, and also within the space that we create. I guess before we kind of get into habits and technology, I think there'd be probably maybe not 100%, but very close to 100% of the people listening to this podcast saying, I 100% agree with you, Daniel. I don't need more information. I don't need more email. I don't need more of this. I don't need more of that. What I really need is more space. Sometimes that might be rephrased as I need more time, but quality time at that maybe alone. I don't know. It's like you say, time to think, time to process. How do you actually create that? Because sometimes I've heard modern life described as a self-tightening knot. In other words, we tend to paint ourselves further and further into the corner. We take on more, we do more, we don't say no to things, even though we should say no, or we kind of want to buy into the myth of having it all. So how to create space? And again, obviously I think I understand the benefits, but if you could just talk about what do you experience when you do create space?
So I might start with a bit of a concept or a principle, because like you said, I can give you a few life hacks and a few habits, but that's not really the foundation. The foundation is understanding what's happening and then work out how to actually implement this. So when I gave my TED talk last year, I started by putting a glass of water out and then filling it up. And then I kept filling, so it started to overflow, which is good for television, right? So, and I kept it going, and I poured water all over the stage, and I described that the glass for me represents our finite time, our finite capacity and energy to get stuff done. And if that's the case, the overflowing glass represents our context in the digital age, meaning that almost all of us, particularly if we run a business, if you're a dental practitioner, you will have more tasks, more emails, more staff issues, more complexity than you can fit into your glass. You won't finish on a Friday and have everything ticked off your list and everything organised. And then you add in dance rehearsals and school drop-offs, renovations.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then Netflix and podcasts and audiobooks. There is literally just more than we can put into our glass. Now, that may feel overwhelming, but I actually think it's a real opportunity, because making space begins with reality. And so if you ask me where I would start with awareness. And what I mean by awareness is just awareness and probably acceptance that we now are in a glass overflowing society, especially with AI. I don't see the world slowing down for us.
No.
I don't see the pressures of business or the pressures of just making it, in an economy becoming easier. And so therefore the awareness is we are in an overflowing glass world where we will never get it done. We will never be able to tick everything off our list. We'll never be able to complete all the things we need to do. And therefore, we're really only given one choice. And that choice is, well, what do we put in our glass first? And what do we accept will be the overflow? which is a very different idea than feeling guilty because you can't get it all done, and feeling guilty that you can't quite get your inbox to zero, you can't get your list ticked off. And if I just work harder and outrun busyness, well, then somehow I'll eventually have time for my kids. Do you know what I mean? Like or I might exercise once I get my work under control. It just won't happen.
No.
So therefore, the alternative is to say what really matters. How do I put that in my glass first? And then how do I just accept that the smaller things have to flow out? And I think that's the foundational start to making space, living intentionally. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It actually reminds me of, there's a wonderful book by Reid Hoffman who founded LinkedIn. And the book is called Blitzscaling. And the work that we do with our clients is to help them create a business more than a job. So they get leverage through a systems team, which then buys back time. But one of the things that Reid Hoffman spoke about in his book was letting some fires burn. And I think what I'm hearing you say is being okay that the things that fall out of the glass are going to remain undone, imperfect, incomplete, whatever it is. And so I wanted to ask you, what's the mental shift that needs to occur to find peace with that? Because you're a physio by profession, and I imagine physios like dentists have a slightly perfectionistic tendency. And how
do you pick that up?
Oh no, geez, no, it's not obvious at all. But no, the reason we're all relatively high achievers, and so the tendency for a lot of people is, as you say, to work ever harder, to keep running, and to think that they can outrun the busyness when we all know that that's a race you can't just win. So how do you make peace with the idea that things are going to fall out of the glass?
Yeah. Look, it's a difficult process, and particularly for type A, perfectionist type people like possibly you and I think it does come to confront reality. It does. It's about accepting that you simply can't do it. Now, I'm lucky in some ways. I burnt out and I realized, well, there is a limit. But all of us will come across a limit at some point in our life. Yeah. There'll be either burnout or there'll be suffering or there'll be sadness. Something will happen and you'll realize, actually, I can't do it all. It's just about, will you accept that? Probably the harder question is, well, then what do you do about it? Because it's one thing to accept that you've got more than you can handle and not feel guilty about it. The next is, well, then how do I actually live in this environment and thrive? Because obviously it doesn't sound like a particularly nice environment that I've always got little burning things going around or water flowing everywhere. And I think that's where, I've written a book, you mentioned it before, an ebook called How to Say No for a Greater Yes. I work with a lot of leaders. I coach a lot of executives in different fields, not usually in health, who feel overwhelmed and stressed, who have way too much on their plate and huge hours and responsibilities. And the question is, well, how can you constrain your work and get much better at saying no to some things? But the point of saying no and setting boundaries is never to say no. It's to say yes for the things that truly matter. Because every time you say no to something, you're actually saying yes to something else and vice versa. Yes. Don't focus on the overflow. Focus on what goes in the glass first. What are the habits, the relationships, the aspects of your job that are truly meaningful that you absolutely need to keep in your glass, in your time cup? And that's a positive reframing. It's not like, what won't I get done? It's what has to go in first. And what do I need to put attention to and give attention to, and accept that even if my inbox gets out of control and I don't have an Instagram looking house, I'm still playing chess with my kids. I'm still having a holiday. I'm still investing in quality dentistry. Does that make sense? Like it's what are the things that matter? And really that's just about living an intentional life. So while our context is different and it's getting harder to live an intentional life, it's always been the same question. How do I live according to a deliberate plan rather than just hoping for the best? It's just harder nowadays because the pressures are so tight. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I absolutely resonate with it. And I have found myself falling prey to some of those things as well. Feeling like I should have the Instagram house, 24/7 that's got to be perfect, and I'll be hurrying around tidying things up and, getting frustrated that I'm doing that when really I probably just could have sat down and watched a show on Netflix with my kids or something like that.
You need the Instagram teeth, but not the Instagram house.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, totally. I guess what I wanted to ask you about, though, was this increasing pressures, because you made a point that, and I agree with it, that things aren't going to slow down. In fact, perhaps potentially they're going to get even faster because the rate of change seems to be speeding up. We've had AI and all those sorts of things in recent years hit the mainstream. And I was watching an Instagram video the other day of someone whose work I admire, and he said, I just can't believe, business owners aren't adopting AI more, and which I understand because he's seeing it as an opportunity. I'm saying, I know exactly why they're not adopting AI. It's because they're already overworked and overstretched, and AI is moving so quickly that it feels like you can't ever get hold of it. So I wanted to ask you a bit about the rate of change in the world and the impact that you see that. And obviously it means, I'm assuming that we have to be practicing that intentionality all the way through. But where do you see that busyness coming in, and what do you see the impact of that being if we don't get this right, but equally if we do get this right?
Look, and this is probably where I think it's worth diving into the relationship between tech and productivity, because I actually think that the technology piece actually answers a big chunk of why we're so busy.
Yeah.
So when I speak with audiences or train people, I typically ask the question, let's say in a keynote, I'll say, who here, if you had 2 hours of guilt-free space just for yourself this week, just 2 hours, you can't check email, you can't clean the house, you can't catch up on stuff. This is guilt-free time to nourish yourself and to enrich your life. What would you do? And people tell me the same things. They said they'd walk on the beach, they'd have a nap, they'd read a book, they'd maybe get a massage, they'd have a coffee with a great friend, they'd play guitar. Basically, they'd do the life pursuits that have always made us happier and given us a sense of well-being. Then I'll say, okay, well, who here would spend 2 hours on fairly low quality social media scrolling a week? Most people put their hand up. Who here would spend 2 hours on, Netflix or, whatever, Stan, and not necessarily get the most amazing value out of it? Again, most people put up their hands. Who would spend 2 hours internet scrolling? So the point is, it's not that we don't have time. It's that we're filling up an enormous part of our glass with low quality digital activity, and it's stretching us so thin and pushing out the rest of life. For example, now you understand neuroplasticity being in the medical field. So I give an example again in my TED Talk and in my writings that when I was young, I played the piano, or more specifically, my parents paid for piano lessons, but they did they did force me to play the piano. It's coming back. Karma's coming back. I have to do it with my kids now.
Yeah.
But
at least it's not the violin. That's all I'm going to say.
It was not the violin, and I played the French horn as well. That was even worse. But they did make me practice, and eventually, after practicing for a number of years, 10, 20 minutes a day, I could play Chopin and Mozart off by heart. I wasn't amazing, but I felt the music, my fingers moved. So that's an example of neuroplasticity where the brain changes based on what you habitually do. And we know this. Neurons fire, they wire together, and your perception of the world changes based on what you do.
Yep.
The average Australian adult now spends 9.4 hours a day practicing the internet. When you add up smartphones, 9.4 hours a day is the average. Now, possibly not with dentists. I mean, again, in an allied health profession, if you're spending a lot of time with patients, it wouldn't be the same.
Sure.
But any of my office workers in corporate jobs or in government jobs are spending 9.4 hours a day cumulatively once they look at their recreational use, their smartphones and their office-based computers.
Gosh.
They're practicing the internet 9.4 hours a day, and that is a neuroplastic experience. And so what we're seeing is that we are busier than ever before. We are frantic, pushing around information. We're resting online, we're working online, and we are simply filling our cup with so much digital activity that we're losing our capacity to feel like we have space for the rest of life. And so while I give that 2 hour kind of example, in reality, we are literally changing ourselves individually and society, as a society from the inside out with how much internet practice we're doing. And it's making us, it's impacting the quality of our relationships, the quality of our recreation, the quality of our health and well-being and fitness, and our productivity, because we're busier than ever before, but we're not necessarily achieving what truly matters because activity measured by busyness or productivity measured by busyness is not productivity. Productivity is actually knowing what you want to achieve and then doing things slower to get there, which is the opposite. And so I would have something to say in the AI space, because I think unless we deliberately tackle AI from a space-making perspective, putting it in its place, I think it will do the opposite. It will just add noise because we are using technology to solve problems that can only be solved by disconnecting from technology.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things.
There's a lot there, sorry.
There's a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm just mentally processing which of those threads to kind of go on first. I'll come back to the AI in a second, but you mentioned slow productivity in a moment ago, and off air you mentioned, I think it was off air, but anyway, Cal Newport came up in the conversation.
Yeah, Cal Newport is certainly I support his methodologies as a productivity consultant.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about this kind of less is more concept for a second, because when I first heard the term slow productivity, it seemed like an oxymoron. And I'm sure that term was coined to, perhaps pique people's interest. But you used the word slow in your conversation a moment ago, maybe not necessarily in the context of slow productivity, but you said doing more but more slowly, or words to that effect. I wanted to understand what you meant by slow. Is it relative slow or absolute slow, or what is slow and what is fast, and how do they relate to the concept of productivity?
Yeah, I'd probably use it like I like Cal Newport's book, Slow Productivity, which is what you've referred to. And I do support his findings in the sense of he's saying that to be truly productive, and he's really talking about deep knowledge work type spaces, I think.
Yeah, he is,
But he's certainly saying that to be truly productive, we need to do less, but do it better. We need to work at a human pace, and I agree with that. But when I talk about making space, and I probably put that synonymous with slow, it's about knowing, like you said, when to be slow and when to be fast.
Yeah.
So, I think I might, if you don't mind, I might give you a framework.
I'd love a framework because it helps me organize my thinking.
Yeah. And because I think that's how I put my whole kind of, when I talk about speed or getting things done or slowing down, it's all really in this type of frame. And so imagine, it's hard to imagine, but imagine a graph of productivity against technology.
Yep.
Okay, because I wrote my first book asking the question, what is the relationship between both? And it's not a linear relationship. It's not like a line that goes up, that the more technology you have, the more productivity there is. It's clearly not in the research. Neither is a graph where when you start to go up, it plateaus, because actually what we found in COVID, for example, with Zoom fatigue, is that there are actually negative effects from being online. There's not just net positive gains. Yeah. And so like most areas in life, this is what I describe. If you look at the graph of productivity and technology, it's an upside down U curve, like in many areas of life, okay?
Yep.
So you need technology to exponentially increase your productivity.
Yep.
Get a phone, get the internet, learn some tech skills, etc. As I'm sure you all agree, you'll increase productivity in every area. And I would put AI in that bucket as well.
Yep.
Okay. But then you reach a productive middle where more technology isn't giving you better results. You've probably found the sweet spot.
Yep.
But if you continue reaching for your phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night, if every time you've got a minute at the supermarket or on the bus or on the train, you pull out a device, if you fill your life up with so much tech that you're practicing the internet 9.4 hours a day or more, which is for teenagers, well, then you end up in digital overuse, which is you slide down that productivity curve and you end up less happy, less productive and less healthy. And you see this very, very clearly post-COVID. All of society is experiencing digital overuse, and we're trying to solve the problem of overuse by using more technology, which is where the AI problem becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And so the reason I give you that framework, because if you want to ask the question, when should you be slow and what does it mean to be slow? I would say we now need two sets of skills or habits to be productive in any area of life. On the left side of the curve, you need the habits of keeping pace, where you need to learn technology to keep up. Yep. You need to speed up your use of technology and adopt quickly in a wise way and integrate technology so that you can get to the top of that curve on that left side. And at the same time, you need the habits of making space as opposed to keeping pace, which are the habits of slowing down, turning off, and actually intentionally filling your life with things in that glass which don't involve activity and busyness. And the three big areas are relationships are always done better offline.
Yep.
In terms of quality, okay? You simply won't build a relationship with your clients doing dentistry online as well as you can in person. I mean, it's probably not the field you can, but does that make sense?
Yep.
Deep relationships and rapport have to be in person. It's the way we're wired. So you have to unplug. You need to also make space for well-being, and well-being really does need you to mentally switch off. And mentally switching off requires getting off of the internet. There's a whole lot of research around that. So you need to unplug, get fresh air, exercise outside of the online world. And the last one is making space for just a sense of the inner life or spirituality, some of that type of stuff. If you can unplug for rest, relationships, for high quality leisure for the spiritual life, which are the making space habits, and slow down in those areas, well, then the technology piece and the speeding up piece works.
Yeah.
So I think true productivity is having times when you're really busy, you're working hard, you're smashing stuff out, and then times where you put patterns in rhythms in your life where you're deliberately unplugging, slowing down, and making space for rest, relationships, and the inner life. And if you put those things together, then you live in the productive middle.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? It's more nuanced than when should I speed up and when should I slow down. You have to have a framework.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I really appreciate the framework because I was at a training workshop the other day. Sorry, Daniel, I'm going off on a small tangent, but you can probably see on the Zoom video me processing and frowning and all the rest of it. And I was at a training workshop a little while ago. This is unrelated to our conversation, but I'll just share it with you anyway. I was at a training thing and the trainer asked a question. I was frowning, contemplating, and she said to me, "Jesse, you have resting bitch face going on." And I was there with one of our team members. My team member went, "Ooh, yikes!" But it's my processing phase, and I'm processing very heavily at the moment about this concept of when to go fast, when to go slow, and that framework. I think it's a really important framework, and I guess I have a follow-up question that it's not entirely related to dentistry, but it's a question that's on my mind nonetheless. So if it's okay, I'll go there. The concept is around where does remote work fit into all of that? And because we're talking about the quality of relationships being in person. And I wondered what you thought. I mean, you and I both work remotely. My whole team is everywhere but Canberra. And I'm just curious to ask if you have any views about the benefits or perhaps even the potential downsides of remote work and how to build those relationships in that kind of environment.
Look, I think that framework is it's spot on when it comes to remote work in the sense of teams that never spend any time together will struggle over time to have a sense of camaraderie. Now, I've got great subcontractors and people I've got relationships with who I've never met. So I'm not saying you can't have relationships, but I don't feel an affinity with them from a deep relationship point of view, and I probably won't over time unless we actually hang out and have a beer.
Yeah.
So there is that sense where you still have to have teams meet together if you really want to have that sense of teamwork, because you just can't replace the face-to-face.
Yeah.
But the other big problem I'm seeing I'd probably say the problem and the opportunity with remote work is around deep work. Because what I'm finding is working is people are heading into offices and to workplaces. This is probably a slightly different context in dentistry or dental practices, but they literally tell me they don't have time to do their work because when they go to the office, there's so much interruption. There's so many Teams messages, so much email, so many meetings. They spend all their time talking about their work and coordinating their work that they don't have time to do work, which also matches Microsoft's research that 64% of office workers say they're so busy in meetings that they can't do their work. So people are going remotely in order to then have those concentrated, undistracted, deep work time blocks to do the work that really matters, which I would actually put in the making space bucket. You might be online, but if you're concentrating and thinking deeply and doing true creative knowledge work in quiet, well, then it doesn't matter if you've got lots of collaboration and interruption when you're in the office because you're getting the mix of keeping pace and the mix of making space. The problem is that most remote office workers are keeping Outlook on a screen, second screen, almost all through the day with notifications and Teams or Slack notifications coming through, which means they never close the digital door, they never make space. And so they're basically having a party, an open office party at home, even though there's no one around. Yeah. And if you work like that, then remote working is a complete waste of time. Yeah. Because basically you'll spend your day pushing or acting as if you're in a remote team, collaborating and doing lots of shallow work. You don't get the true benefits of oxytocin and actually feeling like you have a team because you're actually remote. And you don't get the benefits of unplugging and making space to do concentrated work. So I think if you're going to work remotely or at least in a hybrid way, you need to truly have spaces where you concentrate, focus, unplug, do your best work without distraction, and then connect and communicate, which again is both sides of that space maker spectrum.
One of the hardest roles, I think, in a dental practice is the reception role. And I'm sure it's the same in physio or medical practice or whatever it is. And the reason I think it's probably the toughest role is because that receptionist is forever switching context with what they're doing. You know, the phone rings, a patient comes in, a bill needs to be processed, you know, and a patient has a query about, you know, whatever it is. The clinician comes out, you know, all the goings on happen in that area. What's really interesting to me in the dental context is we see our reception team almost as an admin team, and I do think they're different roles from the point of view of the admin that needs to be done, usually needs to be done in an uninterrupted space. One of the things I wanted to ask you is how do we create that space then for someone whose role in the practice is forever interrupted? Is it a case of physically removing them to another office so they can shut the door literally and do what they need to do? Or are there other thoughts and ideas that you might have around that particular role? Because I know it's a challenging one.
Yeah, I'd be looking at what we call shared or coordinated time blocking for that. So if you're a sole practitioner, like if you're in a small practice and you're the only administration assistant on site, that's tough, right? Because you do need to literally be present every single time a person walks in the door. I think if that's the case, you probably have to accept that that person's role is predominantly there for interruption-based, service-driven activity, and that's their core role. So they don't need to do deep work because that's their core role. And if you want to have a significant amount of responsibility on that person or in your practice for, let's say, deep admin, you might need to subcontract that out to people who can concentrate because it's actually very hard to do with a single person. But if you have a slightly bigger role, you've got 2 or 3 people who are working at the same time, then coordinated time blocking is perfect. So what you do is instead of everyone sitting there doing the same job all at the same time, and I see this when I go into big practices, everyone is doing the same role. Well, then instead you want to coordinate, okay, so Tanya's going to have her half-day deep work to do the deep business administration and development in solo concentrated ways. Yes, literally have a separate part of the office or get her to work from home and the others cover her role. Because the next day, John gets to have his deep work time block and then, Robin does the next day. So what you're doing is you cover each other so that throughout the week you can all have a number of hours where you can do focus work for the broader project-based admin stuff without losing the ability to cover the immediacy of the moment. And so you do need to separate those functions though.
What is it about being a physio that has helped you help other non-health related clients? What are the benefits of your professional background as a physiotherapist that your clients get to experience now? Because sometimes we hear productivity consultants and we go, yeah, that's amazing, that'd be terrific, but I think that your customers must get some benefits from your background in healthcare as well. So I'm curious to understand, what do you think from your health background has helped you in your productivity world?
Oh, great question. I actually don't feel like my job is that different, to be honest.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because it is different, of course, but essentially I think physiotherapy is about diagnosing issues. So you're finding pain, you're diagnosing it, you're motivating people to shift their habits and you're educating people to understand what's happening in their world. And that's no different with productivity. I'm just working with a different field of pain, a different set of habits and a different set of communication skills, but it's all very, very similar. In fact, one of the things I think that makes Space Makers successful as a productivity business is that we focus on habit change, not information exchange. And that came from physio, that I just think information doesn't change anyone's lives. Information is important, but information that is not applied won't change your life. And therefore, the way we approach everything is we give people space to reflect. We ask them to keep them accountable rather than do lots of broad training. I would rather work with a group of people and actually do follow-up and say, did you do your exercises? Even physiotherapy research says if I write people's stick figures out for them, they're less likely to do their exercises than if I get them to draw their stick figures and get them to write the exercises down on paper. And I do the same thing with productivity. Instead of giving people the activities, I'm like, okay, well, you write it down. And what would you like me to ask you when you come back next fortnight? So I use all the same health coaching practices as a productivity consultant. So yeah, spot on. It's the same job. I just help people with their inbox and to-do lists and technology rather than biceps.
Yeah. We spoke about the pace habits, we spoke about the space-making habits, and we also just spoke about knowledge in and of itself doesn't change anything unless you apply it. And in the work that I do, I like to think we have some tremendous resources. I like to think we've got some good material to share with people. Our challenge in coaching is probably the same as yours, and that is, how do we get people to apply it? And I'm curious to ask, what have you observed about those people that are able to change habits quickly versus those that may get stuck? How do you make that leap? How do you take the action that's required on the knowledge that you've just acquired?
It's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, I know.
Yeah, no,
you've got 30 seconds to answer like a 30-day question.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's a terrible thing, isn't it?
Like anything, I mean, it's about readiness for change. Firstly, if people aren't ready to change, well, then the role of information is to get them to the point of readiness. So, if people aren't ready to stop smoking, you need to give them enough information to know that smoking's bad for you. So that's why I put blog posts out. I do YouTube videos. I put out a wide spread of information to start moving people towards wanting to have space in their life and to getting a bit of an imagination of what that looks like. Then you move to people, from readiness to change to, I think, there's a number of different stages, but essentially when they're ready for change, but they don't know how to do it. And then it's about giving people very, very small practical steps that they can commit to. Because once people start doing something, well, then they start to feel like they can change their world. But the beginning of change is often moving from that idea of change to doing something. So, in our podcast, season 1, the first activity we gave people is to go outside for 5 minutes and breathe fresh air. The second activity was to write 3 people's names down and text them something that week. So again, we're trying to break down big things into small steps. With Email Ninja, I get people to turn off the email alerts, just one small step at a time. Because once you start practicing change, you start embedding the change. And then obviously you move on to sustainable, accountable habit change from there. And that's usually more in coaching and kind of more close-knit environments.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure it's the same in dentistry, isn't it?
It's very, very similar. And it just is always interesting because my observation that in any endeavor, it's those people that are able to take action on the things that they learn as compared to, those who learn the same things but don't apply it. And the results are, chalk and cheese, of course. And I think anyone who's ever worked in a position where you're trying to change people's behavior, whether it's through physiotherapy or dentistry or productivity coaching or business coaching or any of those sorts of things, it's always a case of how can I be more effective in facilitating that habit change? How can I, help people understand where they are? So I really appreciate that answer. I think it's really elegantly stepped out.
Can I give you my magic question, my one big productivity question? I don't know if it works in the health setting, but it is the one that I ask like literally day after day, week after week.
Go for it.
Is what is one thing that stood out to you from this conversation that we had? And what is one thing that you're going to do this week as a result of it? We might even ask it at the end of the podcast. What is one thing that you've gained from this conversation out of everything we've talked about? And what is one thing that you could commit to in the next week to do? I find those questions very, very helpful because they get to the crux of it, and it means that everyone finds something different, but they apply something.
Oh, I think actually we should ask that question. And what we might get people to do is ask that question, what's something you've taken away? What's something you're going to change? And Daniel, if people wanted to let you know what they've taken away from this episode, how would be the best way for them to let you know what the takeaways have been?
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Look, I'm at info@spacemakers.au. Feel free to email me directly. Yeah, tell me what stood out. What's the one thing that stood out? And usually the one action that you plan to take, the one small next step, is in response to that aha moment, that one single insight. And that's really how I've seen leaders change their life in even huge ways simply by asking that question day after day. What's the one thing and what can I do? As long as you do something every day, every week, every month as a result of your insights and reflections, well, then you change the world.
Actually, while we're talking about resources and contacts, if I could encourage the listeners here to also check out Daniel's YouTube channel. It's packed with goodies, lots of really good videos there, some really useful information, and equally check out Daniel's blog as well at spacemakers.au. There's, again, a lot of good stuff there. If you could go back and talk to young Daniel, fresh out of physio school, maybe just at the point of taking on the team that you were running. What advice would you like to give young Daniel?
Good question. Well, on a silly note, I'd say invest in Zoom shares before the pandemic.
Yeah, this is going to be this thing called Bitcoin, you know?
Yeah. But on a serious note, I reckon I would tell myself, and I'm very grateful I could say this, I'd say you're going to make really good decisions in life, and even though you have no idea where your job's going to take you, because I've done a lot more than just business and physio as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to work out well. So don't be so concerned and anxious along the way. I'm actually really grateful for how my life's turned out, at least for now. But I've worried way too much and I've found it way too stressful, you know, being concerned about the future and being concerned and double guessing myself. So it would have been nice to have the same life, but with a whole lot less angst, if that makes sense.
It makes lots of sense. Daniel, I want to say thank you to you for joining us today. You've been incredibly generous with your time, been incredibly generous with your knowledge and your expertise and experience. But most of all, you've been very generous with your heart, and I'm really, really touched and grateful for that. Ladies and gents, again, I'd really encourage you to head across to spacemakers.au. Check out all the resources there. There's YouTube channels, there's podcasts, there's books, there's a plethora of resources. And I would encourage you, if you do have issues with email, and I'm not even game to show Daniel my inbox, check out Email Ninja. I actually think email is an incredible tool. I remember the day, Daniel, when I was excited to get an email. I remember that.
I know, like a Hotmail email came, you're like, wow, I sent an email and one came back.
Yeah, and now it's like, oh my God, I got too much. And people say, did you get my email? Going, it was lost amongst the 300 other ones I got, right?
Yeah, it was lost amongst the other pain. Hey, may I just suggest that I actually have a free mini course at emailninja.au.
Yep.
We haven't actually ended up that practical. We've kind of talked about frameworks, but I'll actually teach you how to set up folders, how to actually get your inbox to zero. So yeah, if you're interested in like actual email management, emailninja.au is the way to go.
All right, great. Let's do that, because I think that is actually something really useful and practical. And I know dentists are as afflicted with inbox drama as the rest of us. So, and you know what? My wife, I should say, my darling wife, she's a dentist. She's a really, really good egg. And, you know, people don't get to look at their email all day because they're busy with patients. And by the end of the day, she's gone from, you know, whatever email level she had to a whole bunch more. And, you know, and then she's going, oh man, it's just hard to stay on top of. And we're going, yep.
It's like life Tetris. You can't keep up.
I know. It's like running on that treadmill that gets faster and faster and faster, and you feel like you're going to do a face plant at the end of it. Anyway, ladies and gents, head across to emailninja.au to create space. And we want to get into those pace habits and those space-making habits, but particularly the space-making habits. I love that. So thank you, mate. You're a good man.
Jesse, it was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.